So El Paso, I thought I'd mention a few fun facts about El Paso. We are in Mountain Time Zone. Some people don't realize that we're out further west than we are. Some people think Abilene is West Texas, and we're far West Texas. So El Paso is actually closer to Los Angeles and Denver than it is to Houston. Here's another fun fact. It's the 6th largest city in Texas. It's the home of Fort Bliss. It is now called the Sun City. It used to be called the 6th shooter capital of the world. El Paso is called the boot capital of the world. I think Stefan Shore probably has a pair of boots from El Paso, those shark teeth on them. 302 days of sunshine. And last but not least, it is the birthplace of the margarita. So here we have a picture of El Paso in 1800s. This is, the town is about 800 people. It's on the border. So what they did for water back then is they used shallow wells, and they used the Rio Grande. One of the problems with the Rio Grande back then is that it was muddy and it was intermittent. You can imagine the runoff that you might get each year, or no runoff. It's kind of unreliable. You didn't know what it was, a feast or famine. If you can see closely in this picture, there's people actually hauling buckets of water. So they probably had maybe a little small shallow well or a cistern that collect water, and then they're literally hauling water around. So it was a challenge back then. Here's a picture in the 1880s. The railroad is coming to town. You're going to need more water. And in the 1880s is when a franchise was given to Sylvester Watts, and he actually started laying pipes in the main street and using pumps to provide water to customers. So you can't talk about old El Paso without seeing some rangers, law and order. They needed these guys to instill law and order in the Wild West. So here they are. They got their hats. They look like they're ready to take care of the bad guys. As the city grew, and again, I mentioned that one of the challenges that El Paso had was dealing with the muddy Rio Grande. So they decided that they would construct a well. This is a first well in El Paso, and it was 60 feet deep, and it's 13 feet diameter. So they did that so they wouldn't have to deal with as much mud. I think this was a solution to the mud problem. So this was a start of advancing water well technology in El Paso. This well was dug, and as they advanced the digging, they would stabilize it with bricks and mortar and rock, whatever they could to stabilize the hole. This picture right here, it shows the location of the well. You could see it's very close to the Rio Grande, so they had this nice wetted up alluvium, and at 60 feet they could get a reliable amount of water. This is John Wesley Hardin. He's the famous poster child of bad behavior in Old West El Paso. He allegedly shot 40 people, cattle rustling, shot a man while playing poker, and he allegedly shot somebody for snoring. So he's notorious for his bad behavior, and one might suggest that his bad behavior was prompted by the poor water quality that he was receiving. So here's a picture of El Paso in 1910. At this point, we're making our transition from using Rio Grande. We're getting away from using the Rio Grande. We've actually found a way to drill wells. We're pumping more wells in the Waco Basin, and you're going to see this is a theme that I repeat. At this point in 1910, we had 27 wells. Water was quite a challenge back then in 1910, 1900. And in fact, a sign of affluence, people would actually import water from Deming, New Mexico, which is over 100 miles away. So they would carry it in these buckets, and I think the water probably tasted better, so it was worth the trip. Okay, here's a picture of El Paso. I'm going to start going through a timeline. Okay, here's World War I. There's a biplane. I believe that's a Sopwith Camel. And in 1916, that's when El Paso quit using the Rio Grande altogether. We fell in love with the groundwater production, no mud, no problem. Just find a way to pump the water. And if you look on the east side of that little mountain strip, that's where the Waco Bolson is. And that's where we started drilling wells to produce water for our city. Okay, here we are, 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Great Depression. And when we wanted more water, we drilled more wells in the Waco Bolson. Okay, here's Pearl Harbor, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And at this point, El Paso said, hey, we need to get back to the Rio Grande. So they built a water treatment plant at the tip of the mountain there. It was the Canal Water Treatment Plant. This is a remedy to provide more water to the customers of El Paso with the influx of soldiers from Fort Bliss during the war. Okay, 1950s, we have the power couple of the day, Marilyn Monroe, Joe DiMaggio, movie star and famous center fielder for the New York Yankees. The 1950s were marked with the drought of record in El Paso. This is where the Rio Grande barely had any flow for about 5 years. And our response to this drought, everybody has to respond to drought. Our response was to drill wells in the Canutillo well field, which is on the upper west side of El Paso. We would actually pump these wells, let them discharge and flow down to the river. And at the tip of the mountain there, you can see, well, you can't really see it, but that's where we had our water treatment plant. So we were actually pumping groundwater, letting it flow about 8 miles downstream, and then pulling it in for treatment at the Canal Water Treatment Plant. 1960s, Beatlemania, Liverpool, England, and this is return back to the Waco, our love of the Waco Bolson. And when we needed, the city was growing out in an easterly direction, and when we needed more supply, we would actually just drill more wells. That was pretty much our strategy. Okay, we've advanced to the 1970s. There's Richard Nixon. We know the story about him. And impeached, 1974. In the 1970s, we are still growing, and our solution is more groundwater pumping from the Waco Bolson. Okay, we're in the 1980s now, and El Paso still has this thirst for groundwater from the Waco Bolson, and this is what's driving our supply. This is what when we needed supply, we said we need more groundwater. And one of the things we did in the 1980s was actually try to go into the state of New Mexico, and if there's some lawyers here, they probably remember that, is El Paso versus Reynolds. The Supreme Court ultimately decided that New Mexico can forbid or restrict any kind of groundwater importation across the state. So this was a failed effort of El Paso to produce even more groundwater. So again, this is our focus. When we needed more water, we pump more groundwater, even if it was New Mexicans' water. And as a result of that lawsuit, we will never go into New Mexico again to get water. Okay, here we are. This is 1994. If it doesn't fit, you must have quit. O.J. Simpson. 1994 kind of marks the beginning of a change for El Paso. We have an aggressive water conservation program. We also built a big water treatment plant in their lower valley. And the reason for this is that we said we cannot continue to pump the Waco Bolson like we have all these years. So 1994 is kind of the beginning of, I think, our looking ahead with some promise of what we have available to us. Again, using more surface water, quit relying on the Waco exclusively, and we started the water conservation program. Okay, this is 2001. This is when we realized that we have a vast amount of, an ocean almost, of brackish groundwater in El Paso. And this is when we really started to study groundwater, how much there is brackish groundwater. We started evaluating the technologies, and then, of course, if you have desalination, you got to figure out the concentrate. And we figured out the concentrate. We use deep well injection. We have 3 deep injection wells. We have very suitable geology that allows the injection of concentrate. But that's what we started. We started planning in 2001, and here we are, 2007, their first iPhone, And in 2007, that's when we actually got our desalination plant, the largest inland plant in the world. There's a picture of one of our skids. We have 5 skids. It has a capacity of 27 million gallons a day. Okay, so now, that was kind of all yesterday. This is today. This is a look at the infrastructure that El Paso has for its customers. If you look in the top left corner, we have our Cañutillo well field, our Mesilla wells. There's about 30 of them. That's what supplies all of West El Paso with groundwater. If you live in West El Paso, you get groundwater year-round. You don't get any surface water. And if we look over east of the mountains there, we have the Waco Basin. The Waco Basin is marked with those red wells. We have 2 management challenges in the Waco: groundwater decline, level decline, and brackish water intrusion. So we are addressing the brackish water with our desalination plant, and we are addressing water level decline with water conservation and use of our aquifer recharge program, and then using surface water. By using surface water, and I heard Robert, glad you said conjunctive, we are masters of conjunctive use. We want to maximize river water when it's available. Unfortunately, we've been in this prolonged drought, but when the river returns, we are going to maximize its use. And when it's not here, we use our Waco Basin. And let's see, we got the white dot at the tip of the mountain. That's our first water treatment plant, built in the early 1940s. And then in 1991, we built that other water treatment plant down in the lowest part of your picture. That's called the Jonathan Rogers Water Treatment Plant. And then out to the east, you see that kind of orange dot. That is the K. Bailey Hutchison Desalination Plant that was built in 2007 in partnership with Fort Bliss for a reliable water supply for both the Army and the city of El Paso. When we talk about the water supply for El Paso, again, conjunctively using surface water and groundwater, here's what our aquifers look like. They have the Mesilla Basin and the Waco Basin. These aquifers are in Texas, New Mexico, Mexico. They don't stop at the border, and they're both alluvial aquifers. I like to say if you're standing on a mountain in El Paso, you're not on the aquifer, you're on the edge of the aquifer, and then if you're looking off in the vast distance, you're going to be looking across a valley. That is our aquifers. Our aquifers are thousands of feet of unconsolidated sand, silts, clays, gravels, and the groundwater lies at various depths, depending on how close we are to the river. This is a cross-section of an aquifer. Again, on the sides you can see what would be a mountain range, and then underneath is a bedrock formation. And then if you look in the middle, that is the aquifer itself. The aquifer is a buried combination of the sand, silts, clays, gravel, alluvial aquifers deposited in a river environment. So it's kind of a mixture. You don't really know what you get. But as you go further east in El Paso, the Waco Basin becomes more and more clay. And within those clays, we have more and more salinity, and that's where we have our desalination plant. The other huge component of our water supply is the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande is an important supply for us. Over half of our annual supply comes from the Rio Grande when it's a full river supply. When it's a drought supply, it goes down to as much as 15% of our annual supply. So when you look at the Rio Grande, you look at that green circle, that is the real showcase or focus of our supply. It's fed from the snowpack of the mountains of Colorado, southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. I tell people, if it's snowing in Denver, doesn't matter. If it's snowing in Grand Junction, doesn't matter. Actually, if you know Colorado, if it's snowing in Durango, that's not helping us. If it's snowing in Silverton, that's not helping us. You go right over the divide, and if it's snowing in Alamosa, if it's snowing in Taos, if it's snowing in South Fork, that's where the Rio Grande starts, and that's where we want and need the huge snowpacks. And so when you get this snowpack, then it has to melt in the right way. You don't want to have a warm winter wind that makes all the moisture go up in the skies. You want to have it melt slowly, and you don't want to have it melt too fast or it'll flood and you lose that water. Then it begins its long journey to our reservoir. There's a picture of the snow mountains up there. And lately, our snowpack in the mountains has been very limited. We've been getting about 80% of normal in consecutive years. I think that's what's happening across all of the West. That's why Lake Mead is low. You're not getting snowpacks to replenish the reservoir. That's what's happening in our reservoir. You actually need about 400 inches of snow per year. That's what we'd like to get on multiple years. So once the snow is up in the mountains and it starts melting, it has a long journey through the state of New Mexico. This is the Rio Grande Gorge near Taos. And the reason I show this, not only is it pretty, but it shows that the river has a long, long journey before it goes to storage. And during the perilous flow of the river, it's subject to evaporation and seepage losses. So we don't know what we're going to get, like the box of chocolates guy. You don't know what you're going to get until it's in the reservoir. Forrest Gump. Okay, so here's a picture of the reservoir. This is Elephant Butte Reservoir. If you look in the distance there, those geologists out there, that's an intrusive body out there. At one point, somebody thought that looked like an elephant, and hence the name Elephant Butte. But if you look on that Elephant Mountain there, you can see it's a very high level. What I mean by that is that there's no bathtub rings where you see the dewatering. If you look at Lake Mead and all these other reservoirs, you can see these levels going way down. This picture was taken when the lake was completely full, which is in the late 80s, and we were blessed with huge snowpacks for nearly 20 years. So remember what this picture looks like, full reservoir. I always like to talk about the history of Elephant Butte real quick. It was built in 1916, and it was the largest reservoir in the world, second largest dam at the time in the world. And they had reporters from all over the country coming out here to observe construction. They had to do very innovative techniques on constructing the dam, the way they hauled in cement on buckets through guy wires. You can see those little towers there. They used the cable cars to carry the cement. And this was built 2 decades before Lake Mead. So very innovative, huge building project that I think with Lake Mead being built, people don't talk about this lake, but at the time, this was a huge engineering achievement. Here's some people enjoying Elephant Butte, and not only was it a huge water supply project, it provided relief from flooding. There was people that complained about flooding. Also, the Rio Grande was not being shared equitably. Southern New Mexico, West Texas, we felt like, I think some people rode their horses up there and said that the fields are too green in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, and they said, what's going on? And they found out that the river's dry down in Las Cruces in El Paso, and it's because they're using too much above. This ultimately led to the Rio Grande project. Okay, we're talking about drought. I'll talk about what drought means to El Paso. But if you think about drought, this is a picture of a lake. Could be anywhere in Texas. Maybe East Texas has a lake, hadn't had rain in months. Your lake is dry. What is this community going to do? Maybe go to some innovative technique like Wichita Falls did. But that's what drought means for them. Okay, we got a picture of a cornfield here. A farmer planted his crop, and 6 weeks, no rain. That's what drought means to this farmer. I think maybe you all seen these pictures of Drought Watch, but this is a picture or an illustration of what drought effects are. Interestingly, El Paso every year is in some form of a drought. We get 9 inches, 10 inches every year. So technically, every year the city of El Paso is in a drought. But what drought means to the El Paso water is how much river water we have available. The river water is available to us is what determines whether or not we're in a drought. So remember the picture with Elephant Butte and the water way up on the mountain? Okay, this is what it looks like when we're in a drought. When it was full of water in that previous slide, 2.1 million acre feet. This picture It might be at 100,000, 150,000 acre feet, 5 to 10% of capacity. So it's much, much lower. And as a result of it being lower, we don't know what we're going to get each year. The irrigation season becomes shorter. It is a managed river. If we have a full river supply, we get water from March through October, 30 weeks. If it's a drought, we get water from June through August. This year, we got river water on June 10th, and we ended our river water last week. So that's about 10 weeks of water. That means we're in a drought. So when it's still warm in El Paso, we have to deal with the drought, and that means we have to provide all of our water with our groundwater resources. Okay, let's go to this one. This is a 70-year history of Elephant Butte and the volume of water in Elephant Butte. And that red circle there kind of shows that we're in this drought cycle, and it's a drought cycle similar to what we had on the far left-hand side of the picture. That was the 1950s. So every year, we don't really know how much water we're going to get. So that's kind of what we're in right now. This is our Mesilla Bolson. Again, that's supplying the west side of El Paso, and our pattern of usage has been consistent over the number of years, and that's attributed to our water conservation program and our reclaim program. Okay, here's a graph that I hope you can understand. But if you look at the yellow line, that's when we built the Jonathan Rogers water treatment plant. And in building this plant, we were able to reduce our groundwater pumping. So if you just look to the right-hand side of that graph, generally there's less groundwater pumping. The trend of that green line shows that if we continue that trend established in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we would be pumping groundwater over 150,000 acre feet, which is clearly not sustainable. And this is a picture of the Rio Grande. Most notably, if you see the big dip near the edge where we don't have as much water, that's our drought record in 2013. So when we respond to drought, we have to drill more wells, we have to equip more wells, we have to install more well pumps, and we have a lower valley program of reverse osmosis wells that have some membranes, and we got to keep those wells running. And we have a very aggressive well maintenance program, which allows us to keep all of our wells in peak operational condition. And we have to do this as we compete with the ongoing drought. Okay, so now, real quickly, we're getting to the future. This is I guess a psychic that's going to look towards our future. We prepare our water plan. I think I saw Jennifer out there. She helps us with our water planning. And it's all in compliance with the Texas Water Development Board. We are part of Region E. We're the biggest city in Region E. And when we talk about water planning, we talk about demands, what are your supplies, and what are your strategies. So demands need to be projected out to 50 years, and that's based on your population projections. And your supplies are your existing supplies, and if you need additional supplies, those become your strategies. Real quickly, El Paso is expecting population growth. That's understandable, and that's what we've got planned coming forward. Let me see here. And as we go into year 2070, we will still continue to use the Rio Grande and our diversified water supply. This chart here just kind of, I know it's kind of busy, but the big blue bars at the bottom show our existing supply, and then the added thinner layers are the additional supplies that we need to provide additional water to El Paso. Our water plan, our 2021 water plan, consists of our 4 featured strategies. That includes conservation, we have a purified water project, and we have our aquifer recharge program, and then we have our Del City importation project. The advanced purification, dare I say toilet to tap, we actually received some very favorable funding from the federal government, and we expect to be building that in the next couple of years. And that's taking reclaimed water that's used for irrigation and treating it 4 more times, membrane, filters, ultraviolet, disinfection, and this returns an additional 10 MGD to our customers. We have our aquifer recharge program. I can talk to anybody about ours if you're interested. And then finally, we have our Del City importation. This is scheduled to start in our water plan in the year 2040. There's a picture of some center pivot irrigation. And right now there's grapes, there's chilies. So we plan on 2040 as our first phase, 2050 is our second phase, and we have, in addition to our 4 featured strategies, we have alternative water management strategies. So we're always looking at something. Then finally, as we go into the future, we will continue to have a diversified water supply portfolio, and innovation will be key to helping us meet challenges of the future. And that concludes my presentation.